Mouth breather. Still working on trying to brew up a video talking about the various issues I have with specifically the American version of capitalism. But thought of a different aspect of that overarching topic that I could talk about instead. And this is not specific to America. This is present in pretty much all capitalist approaches, more or less all over the world. And it is the idea that, the capitalist, mercantile, whatever you want to call it, system of economics originates with the sale of goods and services, but there's a third category of economic stuff that is neither a good or a service. It is a roundabout situation where, actually it applies to some service type jobs, I suppose, but the issue is that you're providing something that is of value, but it is not, you're not doing an exchange in straightforward terms. You're not saying, here's a pear for your 50 cents or whatever. You're not saying, sweep my floor for $10. You're saying here's a person who deserves to earn a living somehow because they have expenses. They have to have money coming in order to cover those expenses. But whatever it is that they offer to society, if it is of value at all, it is not something that can be directly sort of traded away. You're not providing value in and of itself. Rather, you're artificially charging money for something that you already have, and you're basically allowing access to a thing that you have in abundance or that is not a tradable good or whatever. But, so the thing is potentially infinite, but you're treating it as finite and charging for access to it, not because you're exchanging anything, but because you just need to make money, so you artificially charge money for whatever the thing is. The ultimate example of this, and the inspiration for this, was in a television program. A character shows up looking for the rent. This is a very common trope in TV. Charging rent for people to live in a house that you run. Now, there are some expenses involved in running like a boarding house or whatever, obviously. So to some extent you need to, if you're the landlord or landlady of a piece of property and you are allowing tenants to rent there, you have some need to charge money from them in order to cover the costs that their presence incurs. But for the most part, you're charging them money for something that you could offer them for free. I mean, technically any product or service could be offered for free. So this is maybe not a strong basis for this argument, but if you so you're not like the economic theory is that you're trading time essentially, but time is an infinite commodity, and it kind of doesn't make sense to think of it in those terms. So you have this house. If it has to be paid for, you're paying for it, whether the tenants are there or not. And you charge rent not because you are necessarily providing value by opening up the opportunity to be tenants in your existing property. Like you're not exchanging anything by letting them be there. They were just, so you had this empty space, and in order to, you use this space in order to obtain money, because it's socially agreed upon that the person who occupies the space has to give you money for the right to do so. But it's not an exchange. It's not really the person who owns the house isn't really giving anything up, because if it just sat empty instead of having you in it, they wouldn't lose anything by losing the opportunity to charge you money. So they're not exchanging in any meaningful sense. They're not giving anything up, really. But other than the opportunity to rent it to somebody else, which is self-defining problem. It's if it's true, this is like what I talked about with the God thing once upon a time. If God created the universe, who created God? This is the same sort of I can't figure out what to call it. But if the unit is worthless except to rent it out, then it remains worthless. You can. One of the arguments for why you shouldn't rent it out is that if it's occupied, you can't rent it out to someone else. Well, that's a ridiculous, self-defined thing. Anyway, so so that's one example. There are probably other examples. Copyright law is kind of one. If you're a wandering minstrel who goes from town to town and literally sings for his supper, you are providing a service. But if your grandfather was a wandering minstrel who sang a particular song as he wandered from town to town, and you have inherited the copyright to that song and you are continuing to be paid royalty fees based on it, you are, that's another form of the rent thing. You are just kind of squatting on this piece of intellectual property the same way that a landlord squats on a piece of physical property, and you are charging people access rights for something that you could give an unlimited amount of access. You could another example is license. A closely related example, still in the intellectual property domain, is licensing rights on, let's go with an extremely showy example. You are Marvel Studios, and you own the film rights to the character of, say, Thanos. In order for anybody to make a movie with Thanos in it, they would have to pay licensing fees, and that's assuming that you would even agree to a licensing agreement. That gets into a whole other thing of the amount of negotiation necessary to get a deal in place that could potentially be so lucrative for the other guy that the first guy is going to drive a really hard bargain based on what he thinks the perceived value is, and the two are just both kind of trying to screw each other over by saying, well, I'll only give you $10 million because I only expect to make $20 million off of this property, and in his mind he thinks he's going to get $30 million, so he's trying to pay less than he has to for the rights. Anyway, I say anyway a lot, I've noticed that. One of my little tics. I have a number of them, as you'll no doubt observe. Anyway, the example of Thanos. Whether you rent, so if you own the copyright on Thanos, if you offer a licensing deal to one other person and they make one other Thanos movie, versus if you theoretically you could sell the licensing rights to 100 different movie studios, and there could be 100 different movies that star Thanos as a character. This is kind of a bad example because you can't get that much mileage out of a character, but like the Star Wars universe, for instance, absolutely could have 100 different movies in it because it is that vast and expansive a setting. You could make a limitless number of different movies all set in the same overarching universe. They obviously couldn't be continuity with each other, but they could all be adherent to an overarching guideline. Anyway, God damn it, I did it again. So whether you sell the rights to 100 Star Wars movies or to one Star Wars movie, and how much you get for the rights, is all arbitrary, negotiated, projected expectations. It's basically just all made up. It's a bunch of people decide what the property is worth, and then they try to find someone else who agrees that it's worth that much and will pay that much, and if they can't find anybody who agrees, then they might lower the asking price in order to try and get a buyer, or they might just accept that the thing can't be sold. But in any event, it's all made up. It is all completely arbitrary. It is all based on what people have decided is appropriate. And so whatever the noble beginnings of capitalism might have been when, only one person in the valley owned an apple tree and could decide how much other people had to pay for the right to buy for buying an apple, I have 100 apples that came in this harvest season, so 100 lucky people get to pay me X amount of dollars and they get an apple. That made sense. That was, you could debate the exact value of an apple based on the number of apples that were available. But with these infinite things, with these intellectual properties that have to be negotiated all over the place, there is really no limit on how much it can be worth, other than, economists might claim that the numbers make sense, but they wouldn't make sense to anyone other than the economists, and they might not even make sense to other economists who don't agree with the exact theory of economics that is being operated under. So the whole thing is just nonsense, made up, just justifying however much you think you deserve to get paid based on your own expectations of how much you have to pay for the right to be alive, and that part is somewhat understandable, but within that wiggle room, people will try to get away with as much as they think they can. And because it's all arbitrary, because it's not fixed to an external physical reality, it is much easier for that system to be abused. So, if you're going to have capitalism at all, you really want to watch out for it being that kind of capitalism, where that kind of opportunity for things to be, for human evil, for lack of a better term, to run away with the whole business, and greed to operate without limits, and people to screw each other over. The whole thing is removed from the tangible physical realities of we only have 100 apples. And it's, if you have an infinite number of apples, then economic theory suggests that they should sell for nothing. But, and I'm not sure that I even agree with that theory, but if you buy that theory that cost is based on supply and demand, then when you are dealing with something like licensing rights or rent, where the value is more or less infinite and you can just arbitrarily set your own price point, kind of without any external factors really controlling it, I think that leads to a lot of really bad behavior and a lot of indulgence of humanity's worst impulses.